All right, I think we're officially live. What's up, everybody? My name is Zack Krueger, and this is episode 2 of Roster Locked, a best ball show. And with me tonight is Michael Dubner of RotoViz. He is a writer over at RotoViz. He is also a director of, the founder and the creator of Functional Fantasy Points, which is something that he came up with last summer, and he published an article over on RotoViz. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, along with some roster construction strategies and theories as we get into an Underdog Fantasy Best Ball Mania 2, Mania 2 draft, where we will be tackling that tonight here in a little bit and just going over some of the things that Michael's talked about with his Functional Fantasy Points articles at RotoViz. He has more than one. We're going to cover the intro one today. Michael, thanks for joining me today. How's everything going?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach, and I'm ready for tonight's stream where we're going to certainly take home the $1 million prize on stream tonight. And hopefully we'll at least help one of the listeners get the second place prize.
Yeah, exactly. I know that they're probably going to be, scrounging for the second or third prize, but we'll definitely leave a little bit something for them on the back end while we walk off with $1 million. We have not gotten into a draft yet. I kind of know these things are filling rather quickly, I believe, so I didn't want to hop right into a draft and not have a lot of time to discuss the content that I wanted to cover beforehand. So real quick, I'm going to share my screen, and what we have here is functional fantasy points and why you're overvaluing volatility in best ball. But like I said, Michael came out with this article last July. Can you tell us a little bit about this, kind of where you came up with the idea from? I think it's a very well-written piece. It explains a lot about how we should be viewing our players that we're drafting in best ball drafts, and definitely is I would say a nuanced angle for how we should maybe be approaching drafts going forward. So what can you tell me about this article? Run me through it a little bit. I'll scroll as needed so we can make sure everyone gets a chance to get a decent look at it.
Yeah, I think that the motivation behind this article is we always intuitively know that spike weeks matter in best ball. That's why players like Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Deshaun Jackson historically go higher in best ball compared to, say, season long. But I always had trouble kind of conceptualizing how spike weeks are historically measured, such as greater than 20 fantasy points or greater than 30 fantasy points. How many of these individual weeks do you really need? I always had trouble with that. So I tried to create one metric that would encapsulate all of that, which I do with functional fantasy points. And so what I say functional fantasy points is pretty much, it's a proxy for the points that we have a player adds to starting lineups. So, for example, we can create a baseline score, which I found the 65th percentile score for all wide receiver fantasy scoring weeks, which is about roughly 11 fantasy points or so. And so that's our baseline score. And any points a player scores above that baseline will be calculated as functional fantasy points. Again, so it's pretty much the points that we have added to a starting roster. And unlike in traditional season long, in best ball, we don't have to pick when we start our wide receivers. And since we draft a minimum of about 7 wide receivers in a given week, we can pretty much assume that we're going to get the baseline production from all of our wide receivers. So what really matters and what the edge in best ball is finding those wide receivers that can score above baseline. And that's pretty much what functional fantasy points is getting at. And as you can see there, what you have pulled up is the difference between Will Fuller and Larry Fitzgerald from 2019, which was really the perfect example of why functional fantasy points matter. In that year, Larry Fitzgerald was actually drafted later than Will Fuller and scored more fantasy points than Will Fuller. So he was drafted later. Fuller was drafted later and scored more fantasy points, I believe. Yet Fuller was the one with more functional fantasy points, and that's why he had the higher win rate. You can see that Fuller had about 50 functional fantasy points while Fitz had 25. So even though Fitz was drafted later and scored more fantasy points, he had the lower win rate because he didn't have as many spike weeks. As you can see, Fuller had that monster 54-point week, or is 41 points there.
Yeah. No, I think this is a really good chart. I think the thing that it really just does a great job of breaking down And obviously this is just one example, but it really kind of shows you how when you're looking at the best ball format, it really kind of it creates, I think, a wider lens for exactly like what you said. Do the points matter? I think if we're looking over here, it looks like Fitzgerald had 179 points that season to Fuller's 134. But when you look at the functional fantasy points, essentially Fitzgerald's 24.2 is suggesting, I mean, I know that that's a subtraction of the total minus the functional fantasy point baseline, but he's only giving you a marginal amount of added value compared to what Will Fuller is giving you in his big weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that I really do love about it. I think that, I told you off air, but I think that it would be really cool to see something like this kind of take more form in the fantasy industry going forward, especially with best ball becoming a more popular format. There's a lot of people playing it right now. Underdog Fantasy, which is where we're going to be drafting tonight, is obviously doing a giant push, just really marketing their product, marketing best ball. You've got a lot of new people who are out there in the best ball streets right now in the Underdog draft rooms. So I think maybe having a better understanding of how we're able to apply these players to our roster and better understand the value that they're bringing to our teams will be rather instrumental going forward if this is something that could become more mainstream. I really thought it was an outside the box, well-written, well-done article. Do functional fantasy points matter? I'm just looking down here real quick and how it applies to win rate. What do you want to say about that?
RotoViz also does try to bring this in their tools with the range of outcomes tool. I think that's a really underutilized tool at RotoViz. And particularly, I think that there's an important distinction also when we're talking about, functional fantasy points, which is basically just another word for spike weeks. Yeah. The difference between spike weeks and upside, I think it's an important distinction in that in upside, you have a changing outcome. So a player might score on the entire season, say 150 points versus 250 points, while spike weeks, we're talking about the same outcome, say a total of 150 points, but how do they actually accumulate those points along the way? I think that's an important distinction between spike weeks and upside as well.
Yeah, well, because spike weeks sound really great and everything, but I think you do want to have a proper balance of not just spike weeks, but also reliable weeks stretched out over a long period of time. If I think that's what you're kind of getting at, is we want to have a good understanding of both.
And we actually see that play out when we look at functional fantasy points at the top end of the wide receiver rankings. The elites, it doesn't really matter if they're scoring a lot of functional fantasy points compared to, say, their PPR points. Functional fantasy points has a very high correlation to PPR. And when you're scoring that many points, you're just consistently scoring above baseline. So in that case, you might as well just use PPR as your stat. Functional fantasy points really matters when you're talking about, wide receivers past the studs. Once when their average is really kind of near or below baseline, that's when the distributions really matter. For sure.
I really think that it's an awesome concept, and I hope that we can see more of it in the future. For you all out there listening, this is the only one of the articles that Michael has done so far on functional fantasy points. He's had a few others as well. I believe they were recaps from the 2020 season, if I'm correct in that. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so definitely worth taking a look at. If you think this is interesting, you can head on over to RotoViz, check it out. I also left it in a link to the article in the show description here on YouTube as well. I'm going to go ahead and get us into a Best Ball Mania draft real quick. I already have it queued up here. Just click in here. We'll deduct $25. We'll go ahead and throw that away. And except we're not throwing it away. We'll be out here winning it all. We'll go with the notifications. So we've already got, looks like 5 people in here. So I expect this to fill rather quickly. Michael,
I have a question for you before we start this.
Sure, go ahead.
What is the first thing you're going to buy when we get that $1 million prize?
Well, I do have a house I'm going to be paying off when that happens. So I'll start with like the basic stuff. I'm actually kind of a rather boring guy when it comes to like the what will you do when you win $1 million or the lottery thing. All I think about is like, paying off some bills like college loans and stuff like that. And then, maybe I'll splurge a little bit on something just to treat myself. But outside of that, maybe a vacation for me and the wife or whatever the case may be. But what about you? Where are we allocating these $1 million to on your end? Because anything over, $1,000, we're splitting this 50-50. So you're getting something in here if we win. You have a lot on the line here, Michael, at my expense.
Oh, yeah. We're putting it all back into best ball next year, and we're going to 100x it again the following year. $1 million exit.
Yeah. I mean, we should probably just go ahead and double down on that. I'm going to tweet this draft link out here real quick. I think I can do it that way. You think this will work? I'm not 100% sure. Are you there?
Yep, I'm still here.
I hit the refresh button. I meant to switch tabs here real quick. Let me get my screen back up here real quick, and then I'm going to tweet out the. I'm going to tweet this out here real quick. We just need a few more people in here.
What is the I know obviously depends on how the draft goes and our draft position, but what has been your typical roster builds heading into these?
So admittedly, this is actually my first one that I did. For this tournament this year. I kind of wanted to make it a big one, make the first one the big one. So I'm not all that warmed up on the Best Ball Mania drafts just yet. Depending on where my draft slot is, I think is really what's going to determine my build. I'm not against the hyper fragile running back approach. I think that seems to be one way that's winning a lot, or at least getting rosters rather far if they're able to get their running backs early. But I think you have to hit the running backs in the right range for that to happen. And the one thing I think that kind of throws a wrench into everything is that Travis Kelce pick. Sometimes people are taking Kelce earlier than what I would expect, and that leaves a decent running back on the board who I'm okay with taking early in the draft. And if that's the case, then I will go ahead and hammer running back early, maybe look to do a hyper fragile approach. And then obviously, it's kind of been shown too that stacking in these tournaments is a really big way to gain an edge, building around the right offenses and, looking for that high upside with the good rosters. How many of these have you done, and what do you usually look to do with these things?
Yeah, I play most of my best ball over on Drafters and DraftKings when they get up, because I prefer the full PPR. But I'm certainly in the underdog streets as well. I think I've done about maybe 25 underdog drafts so far this year, including pre-draft. I've done close to 100 on Drafters. I know that the ADP does differ a bit, but I still think that some type of either hyper fragile or modified zero RB are, the two types of strategies I would tend to go in a tournament, just because they are the more volatile strategies with a higher upside. We don't really care about our floor in these drafts at all. We want first place. I think those are the two kinds of strategies that will lend itself towards that.
Yeah, these are definitely all about chasing that ceiling when it comes to making these picks, which, I mean, it should be the case with any best ball roster, but you can make the easier case for having a well-balanced roster that can give you a week in and week out chance to win and kind of rise through the ranks of just your standard 12-team league. But when it comes down to looking for the explosive upside in your tournament builds, definitely chasing that higher upside, trying to figure out paths where you can see players possibly having spike weeks, not just once in a while, but maybe even later on down the line into the playoffs. One thing that I had listened to on a podcast the other day, which was on Establish the Run, which I thought was actually a really awesome podcast. Definitely check it out if you get a chance. But they had talked about even targeting players who, when the schedule comes out, which it hasn't quite officially come out yet, I don't think. I think that's later on this week or next. But when we see the slate of games and who's going to be playing who late, even keeping in mind the teams that are going to be playing one another that maybe have two explosive offenses later in the season when it comes down to the playoffs for these tournaments with the assumption that you're going to be in them, you're going to be competing, and you want to try to possibly get that perfect storm of some explosive offenses mixed into your roster construction builds in these tournaments, which I thought was a really interesting way to think about it and something I'll definitely be approaching my drafts with when the time comes. Let's take a look at ADP here real quick, because I do think, and we can take a look at it here just to see, but this ADP, I believe, is reflective of post-draft drafts that have been happening in best ball, if I'm correct on this. And some of the indicators here, you can look at some players who probably weren't going that high up until a few weeks ago. I mean, you have Travis Etienne, who's going 49th overall, roughly. The big one who I think has jumped out to me recently is Trey Sermon, who's got an ADP of 82.1. And I'm not sure where he was before the draft, but I would assume
he was around, at least over on Drafters, he was around 135. So this has been quite a jump for him.
Yeah, he's gotten a big jump. I think it's an interesting thing to look at when you consider his ADP in large because of the roster that he got drafted to, and with the coach who he's been drafted with as well, Kyle Shanahan, and now he's got backfield teammates in Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, who are certainly no slouches. Jeff Wilson was one of the more efficient running backs last year, and the guy who I really liked early on in the draft season prior to Sermon being drafted. I know that they recently signed Wilson to a one-year deal before they even let him test out restricted free agency. So I was rather high on Wilson, hoping that he was going to get a chance to kind of get that lead role. And there's a chance he still might. But what do you think about Sermon's ADP? I think it was 82.3 right now. Is that something that you think are drafters being a little bit too bullish on him right now? Or do you think that's about right for what we're looking for in terms of both the best ball roster and even just fantasy as a whole?
Yeah, I actually have the RotoViz risers and fallers tool up right now on the best ball tools, and Trey Sermon is actually the number one riser over the past couple of weeks. He's risen from around 150 to 175 pre-draft, all the way up to like you mentioned around 82. I was very in on Sermon pre-draft. Because a couple of people people liked him around the RB4 to RB6, and I like to target the rookies pre-draft because they always seem to climb post-draft. Once when we're in the 80s, that's getting a little steep for me. I certainly would be out on him at any higher price. I think you can kind of justify around where he's going right now, especially in a tournament like this where you're really rewarded in the playoffs. So you hope that Sermon takes over the starting role by weeks 14 through 17. However, in a traditional best ball league, I might be a little bit more gun shy at that price. Where in drafts where every single week is weighted the same. But again, Sermon, he is part of a backfield that we know will accumulate a lot of fantasy points, which we like. And it's now an ambiguous backfield, which always is, the way that you get upside in your running backs. Just hoping that he does take over the backfield. So I can certainly justify it, but I wouldn't want to pay a price higher than where he's going right now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I think that, like you said, it's an ambiguous backfield. I think really if you're talking about possibly the ambiguous running back to capitalize on now, I mean, Sermon looks good and everyone likes him because of his draft capital and he's the sexy new name. But Jeff Wilson's ADP has just completely plummeted recently. His ADP is down to 146.5, and I believe before the draft he was going around like a 7th, 8th, maybe 9th round ADP. That's where I was getting a good bit of him. He and Raheem Mostert were close to the same. Now Wilson's dropped off and Mostert is sitting there at 80.4. So Wilson's kind of the odd man out, while Mostert and Sermon are the one who everyone is high on. So I think that that's kind of an interesting pivot. If you want to talk about capitalizing on ambiguous backfields, if you do think Wilson has even a remote chance at possibly garnering valuable touches, during the season and in particularly late in the season, then he might be someone who we could be looking to target this draft. But we just started, Michael. We got pick 10 here, so we're going to see how this draft unfolds early on, and then we will take a look at who we have. I'm probably looking to do more of a zero RB approach here. Is there anyone who you would want if a running back came available where we would say, let's not go zero RB, let's go with a wide receiver.
Yeah, if we were to grab a running back here, I wouldn't mind someone like an Austin Eckler, where you still get that pass catching floor. Or I'm always a fan of Jonathan Taylor. I'm less of a fan of Ezekiel Elliott. And then the zero running back target we would want here. I don't envision Travis Kelce falling to the 110. And we might see Tyreek Hill available for us. So those are a couple of names that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Okay, I agree with that. I did see Travis Kelce earlier today go in the 205, and this was not a tournament draft. This was just a regular 12-team league in the $5 department. We are high rollers over here on Roster Lock, so we're going with the $5 leagues. But I did see Kelce go at the 205, which if I had to guess is probably the lowest he's gone at any draft at this point in the season, or very near it, simply because he just isn't a guy who is falling in drafts the way that other elite tight ends are after the amazing season that he had in 2020, where he was just an absolute stud for fantasy managers. And he just went right there. We got 20 seconds here. Are we going Tyreek Hill, or did you want to chase Austin Eckler?
So the other name here is Aaron Jones. If we think that Aaron Rodgers stays, I would be fine with either Jones or Eckler, and then we could also go Hill as well.
I would say let's go Hill and then see who we can get on the bring back. Is that good with you? I'm going to make it.
Let's do it.
All right. So we got Tyreek Hill here. I think we can get one of these wide receivers here, and one of these running backs here. But even if we don't,
I've historically been an anti-Joe Mixon guy. Mm-hmm. I've certainly, this year I've come around to him, and I at least understand the thesis behind drafting Mixon where he's going. The reason to draft him here, I certainly like receivers more than him in a vacuum at this spot, but would be more to go in a modified zero RB approach, so that way we can keep our options open down the line. So I would be okay with Mixon as well, or Eckler at this spot. And it looks like we'll get one of them. Unless if we wanted Adams, we could start off with the wide receiver 1 and 2 potentially.
Yeah, Adams is a guy who early on right now, I really do kind of question whether or not his fall is warranted. I know that I had seen someone post a game split the other day from actually over on the RotoViz game splits app, and I think it was something like when he was playing with, I believe it was Brett Hundley a few years ago. It was Adams who was still averaging like just over 16 fantasy points a game, and this was in PPR. We currently have the options of Mixon, Adams, or Brown available to us. I wouldn't look anywhere past that. Where would you want to go here, Michael?
So I prefer Adams to Mixon in this spot. However, in the third round and fourth round, I envision we'll double tap wide receiver again. So yeah. I would understand the Mixon pick as well.
All right, I'd say let's go Mixon.
Let's go.
We get a little bit with him in terms of a running back who, in all likelihood, has the backfield to himself, which is what you're obviously looking for when you're taking those early round running backs. So to get him in something like the second round, I think is a decent value, assuming, that he's going to have the majority of the touches in both the rushing game and the receiving game, which is something that we've seen with Mixon over the years when healthy. We're only a few years removed from when he more or less relegated Gio Bernard to just strictly a backup role, where Bernard went from averaging 12, 13 fantasy points a game right down to almost nothing, because Mixon was just vulturing all the touches everywhere on the field from him. So I do like the Mixon pick here. I think that the Cincinnati offense could be somewhat explosive.
The other reason why in a vacuum, I would prefer Adams over Mixon 10 times out of 10. Mm-hmm. However, I could see us, first of all, drafting 5 straight wide receivers here, which is one reason why you want to grab the running back early, is because as you get into the middle rounds of the draft, running backs only become worse of a value, in my opinion. The other reason is I find myself drafting a lot of Higgins and Chase when they fall. And then you can also set up that stack with Burrow. So I could see us almost going a team stack here, potentially in a tournament.
Yeah, well, I think team stacks is where you want to go. Obviously, that gives you a chance at a lot of upside, like we said earlier. The other thing is that it can be risky. You know, if a team doesn't do well, which there's certainly question marks surrounding the Bengals, but I don't hate it. I also think that an important thing too when considering these stacks is the cost that it comes to acquire these stacks. And if you look at the ADPs of some of these Bengals players, I'm going to plug them in here real quick just so we can see them. But you got Jamar Chase, who's got an ADP of 49.2. You have Tyler Boyd, who has an ADP of 80.5. And then you got T. Higgins, who's got an ADP of 61.1. So we can kind of build a decent core around these players while still actively trying to acquire the stack. With a couple rounds of play with in between. Are there any particular stacks that you're looking to acquire in drafts simply based off of positional value and ADP as it looks right now?
Yeah, I think that the Bengals is one of my favorite stacks so far because, as you did mention, you can get around a 1 to 2 round cushion on all of these guys. So it's pretty easy to line it up. Another stack I think I've been kind of going – another non-traditional stack, I would say, is being willing to stack offenses without the quarterback. Obviously the quarterback is the centerpiece of that stack. However, there is still a high correlation among the skill position players. So just because you miss out on the quarterback doesn't mean you can't just stack the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the one that obviously comes to mind is something like if you were fortunate enough to get either some kind of mix of Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think another one that falls in that range is Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott, and CeeDee Lamb, all relatively similarly priced wide receivers. You'll see here Amari Cooper and Lamb are literally
going we're coming up on the pick. Sorry to cut you short, but
yeah,
we might want to unqueue Burrow so we don't get drafted a quarterback here in the 3rd round.
Yeah. I'm trying to see here. Let's take a look at these wide receivers here. I'm going to queue them up and then I'll move them around a little bit. Right now,
I would love either Amari or I would put Amari 1. Probably McLaurin, then A-Rob just went. And then we'll see who comes back around to us in the 4th round.
Yeah, so we could take McLaurin here if we want to, which I'm completely fine with doing. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick could easily air it out. My question is, do we consider going Lamb with the possibility of that being a high-powered offense? And just ridiculous shootouts?
It's certainly a decision there. I don't think it's an easy one. They're back-to-back for me in rankings. So it's pretty much a toss-up.
All right. Well, we're going to go with McLaurin. Personally, I don't have a lot of him right now. So we'll go with McLaurin. And then someone like Lamb, like you said, I think we probably double tap receiver here. We maybe even do as much as go 5 in a row. I guess that would be the quintuple tap? Is that how is that?
Yeah. I mean, for me at this point, in terms of wide receiver takes, my take is it doesn't matter that the ADP is relatively efficient at this point. Just grab any receiver. And I don't think you can really go wrong at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, when you get to choose between Julio Jones or Mike Evans in the 4th round, I think that's pretty good. I have a lot of Evans, and I'm fine with taking him here if that's where you want to go. We're currently on the clock right now.
I'm definitely into Evans, and DJ Moore is also my most owned player, so I can't say no to DJ Moore either.
All right, well, here, let's do this. If we want to talk about cheap stacks to acquire, you can't get much more cost efficient than going for a potential Panther stack. And if we still wanted to, we could try to run it out even with the Bengals stack. If that happens to be something that falls to us, we're still going to have Bengals wide receivers on the board. Jamar Chase probably is going to make it to us, but there's no reason to think that one or both of T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd won't make it back to us over these next couple of rounds. Mike, where are you at on tight ends when it comes to doing these things? And how many are you looking to build out with a tournament? I'm usually going 2 tight ends unless I just hold off on the position for so long that I can't logically rationalize going with 2 tight ends simply because I'm not confident in the quality of the tight ends I drafted as my tight end 1 and tight end 2. Where are you going with tight end builds as far as your drafts go? When do you start considering pivoting possibly off of a 2 tight end build versus a 3?
Yeah, I think it all depends really on how much draft capital you spend on these onesie positions, whether it be quarterback or tight end. I really do like getting the Kelsey Kittle Waller range because I think they provide not only such a positional advantage in terms of their value, but then you also get to spend less at the position because then you can take your second tight end really late. While if you go two tight ends in the middle rounds, you're still spending decent capital on them. So I do like to grab the elite tight ends. If I don't, I'll try to pick my poison in the middle rounds. It really just depends on cost for me at tight ends. I don't like to reach. Historically, the middle round of the tight ends do not have high hit rates, but that doesn't mean I'm afraid to go in that range. It really just means I'm very cost sensitive when it comes to the tight ends.
Sure. I mean, the running joke in fantasy for the last couple years has been, and it's not even really a joke, but we'll call it as such for the sake of this conversation, is just that tight end is the absolute wasteland. Really, once you even just get past those elite, like 2 to 3, like you said, the Kelsey, the Kittle, the Waller, points are awfully hard to come by. Even if you are getting a tight end who finishes as a tight end 4 or tight end 5, there's generally a very large drop between those two or those tight ends relative to those guys who are going in the top 3. So while I understand wanting to go ahead and maybe get something like a Mark Andrews or even TJ Hawkinson, who I think has a very interesting case to possibly be top 5, maybe even top 3 among tight ends and targets this year. I think that there is some risk that is baked in with drafting, like you said, the tight ends early and really weighing the cost versus the outcome when it comes to investing that kind of draft capital in a position that doesn't tend to yield as much upside across the board as it would as you could get at other positions at those spots in the drafts. So I think that that's good. Where should we be looking to go here? If you're still on board with wide receiver, I have no problem with that. I want to look at some values that are just kind of hanging out on the board here because I think ETN is interesting, even though I don't expect them to make it to us right now.
Yeah, I would love ETN, especially in a tournament where you could really see him come on in the second half of the year. If he just happens to fully take over that backfield and make James Robinson irrelevant, he could be, that Jonathan Taylor league winner at the end of the year. I don't have an issue with Mike Davis. However, I'm not a huge fan of spending that kind of capital on a guy that, ultimately is a replacement level player, especially when you have big names like T. Higgins still on the board that we could stack with Mixon there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I agree with that. I don't think that there's a running back who I like in this range right now where I feel like I'm obligated to take him because I can see a scenario where they're going to be giving me essentially what we'd be looking for here is RB2 production week in and week out, and I don't see any that's consistent there. T. Higgins, I have no problem just pulling him right off the board now and pairing him with Mixon.
I'm running to the board for this.
Yeah.
Maybe in a traditional fantasy league, season long where you have to make start-sit decisions, I would have been more likely or willing to take a Mike Davis there or something. But in best ball where you can kind of just scrap together that running back 2 between 4 players, I'm willing to wait on that slot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, when you really do consider it, it's something that needs to be talked about. But we'll do that in a second. Yeah. So one wide receiver, real quick, who I like is DJ Chark and a Lawrence stack possibly.
Yeah, I'm open to that, especially with Lawrence. You can get him in that quarterback range that I want.
Yeah, and do we feel good about Chark?
Let's take him.
All right, let's take Chark. He is, if you want to talk about cheap stacks again, he's another one. Like you said, if we take a look here at Lawrence's range and his ADP right now, he's going all the way at the 112. Like if we really want to talk about being set up nicely for some kind of stack here with quarterbacks, we got possibly 2 quarterbacks right now who are going outside the top 100 with Lawrence, and then if we really wanted to, we could go with Darnold. And then Burrow's just coming at 93.9, and there's even a chance that some people may not value him as much when they realize they don't have a stack to put together with him. They may even be opting to reach on a quarterback elsewhere simply because they're not going to run it out with the naked Joe Burrow. So we might be in a good position to get Burrow when we want him.
I just pulled up the the Fanball roster construction explorer, and of course that is full PPR and it is 20 rounds with 2 defenses. However, it's still interesting to look at how our roster construction is shaking out. If you take your running back 1 in rounds 1 or 2, and you have 5 receivers before round 7, so within the first 6 rounds, your win rate is 11.1%. So our roster construction right now is looking pretty good. If we do 2 quarterbacks, it looks to be around 12%, 3 quarterbacks around 9.5%. So if we do have 2 quarterbacks we like in this round 7 to 11 range, we might want to consider constructing our roster that way. However, obviously it depends on when we pull a trigger on running back 2 and what tight ends are available to us.
Definitely. It definitely is something to consider. Obviously, for those not familiar with the RotoViz Roster Construction Explorer, it's a super awesome tool. It's something that I don't go into drafts without if I'm drafting like Michael said on either Fanball or Best Ball 10 or the FFPC leagues. Having that Roster Construction Explorer just tucked away in your back pocket, ready to pull it out when you need it, it feels like a dictionary to best ball success. So even though it is not an underdog tool, there's still ways that you can even kind of get a general idea when drafting your underdog teams of the direction that you should go. And even if there are some subtle differences, I think in large the strategies that exist to be successful at best ball are relatively similar regardless of platforms, maybe with the exception being FFPC, where tight end premium definitely throws a wrench into things and scoring is not balanced equally across the board. But it's a very fun tool to use. Definitely check that out if you get a chance. And we are going to be on the clock here in just a couple of picks. I'll tell you one guy who
you want to cue Dak up just in case if he falls?
We can do Dak up if he falls. This would be deviating from going for a stack, but you can't really deny the value in this range. By the end of the
I think that's important to also recognize is it's okay to not stack in a tournament. I think that stacking, while it's important, I think in these best ball drafts, value is king, and stack should be more of a tiebreaker rather than a primary factor.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes there's just going to be values that are just going to sit on here at the board that you're just going to you can't deny them. Even just watching something like we just saw Damian Harris go over Dak Prescott and James Robinson, same with Devonta Smith. These are not moves that I would be looking to make. If I regret not being at the 12-1 turn, because I would happily take Dak and James Robinson if they both fell here. And now I feel like this is going to be like a decision we have to make because those are kind of the 2 players I'm adding up if either of them get to us.
You want to start adding a couple of players to our queue and then we can sort through them a bit more?
Yeah, I do. Are you fine with Dak or James Robinson here? Because we're about to get one of them.
Yeah, I would. Oh, there goes Dak. We got some time, so let's take a look at tight end, wide receiver, and running back real quick while we have a second.
Well, we got 20
seconds. A little early. All right, go to receiver and running back.
We got 15 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of James Robinson at this point, but I'm certainly open to it, especially with Chark. Our clock's going to expire, so let's just go ahead and take him. And hope that he can be our running back 2 to start the season. You never know what happens with the ETN, especially if ETN gets hurt for the playoffs. You win with James Robinson there.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that Robinson is just going to all of a sudden be relegated to mop-up duty because ETN is there. He obviously hurts his value, but I think that he could be I think Robinson could still be a very valuable player here.
And I would take Ertz here because he's a quarterback that you don't necessarily need to stack because with his rushing upside. So you can add him to the queue and we can look through the other positions as well if you want to for our final 15 seconds, or we can pull the trigger now. He's certainly a value here, in my opinion.
Yeah, my only other option would be Burrow. Do we want Burrow or Ertz?
No, I would personally just take the value on Ertz at this point. I certainly, like I said, I like to stack, but I won't break a tier for that. And in my opinion, Ertz is kind of almost at the back end of that first large tier, while Burrow is more in that middle to top end of that second tier of quarterbacks for me. I certainly prefer rushing upside. And, I think now that we have Hurts, we're setting us up for a 2-quarterback construction, which will open up another roster spot for another position.
I agree. And I think, too, obviously we like the rushing upside that Jalen Hurts brings to the table. He has potential to do a lot of really good things for the Eagles this year. And, even if we wanted to, someone like Jalen Reagor, he's going to be hanging around. And if we wanted to even go with a Jaguar stack, I think Trevor Lawrence will still be on the board, even if Burrow is not. And I'm more than comfortable with pulling the trigger on Trevor Lawrence and pairing him up with James Robinson and DJ Chark. With our next pick, which will be coming up here in the 9th round. I believe it'll be pick 106, which will be just before his ADP, which I do not hate. I think maybe
let's start adding a couple of players to our queue because sometimes we get rushed at the end. So I would just add Rodgers if he's there. We're going to take him also. Yep. Now let's go head over to maybe to running back.
Would you do Rodgers over Lawrence?
Yeah, I would break the stack for that.
Okay, we'll do that. Running back here, Leonard Fournette, I liked him. I've kind of soured on him more recently. Michael Carter is a player who I have no problem queuing up as of right now.
Yeah, he would be my top running back on the board there. I've as a writer for RotoViz, we hate the old dusty running backs, but I personally think James Conner is being very undervalued right now in drafts. It's not out of the question that he is the running back one there over Chase Edmonds. And, I think it's probably closer to a 50-50 split. But I also think that Conner is going to be the goal line back there. I think I certainly like Arizona's offense as a whole. So I just want to get any running back on an efficient offense. And you could just see James Conner stumbling into, it sounds gross, but maybe into double-digit touchdowns there if things really break his way.
Yeah, and I know that when it came down to red zone opportunities, there was not much left on the table for Chase Edmonds after Kenyon Drake got his fair share of the touches. And I think that while Edmonds may possibly be the guy to operate between the 20s, there's a lot that James Conner brings to the table in terms of he's an aggressive runner. He's able to break tackles to a degree. I don't think that he is as impressive as he was in that 2018 season where he just went off, but he was a very solid player. And I think that he has the body and the size to handle the goal line short yardage work compared to Edmonds, who's probably going to, if he's down the goal line, operate maybe more in the receiving game than in the rushing game, trying to get through the line and get those short yardage scores. So I am with you there. James Conner feels like the kind of back to me who will have several weeks of doing nothing, and then he'll pop off for like a 2-touchdown game.
He is the best ball kind of running back,
He is. All
right, let's take a look at tight ends also, just in case if anyone falls to us down there.
Yep.
I'm a fan of Higbee. I would maybe consider him on our wraparound in the 10th. I think that Stafford is a big upgrade for him. No Gerald Everett, I think, is going really overlooked. I think that Higbee, it sounds like he should be the primary tight end receiving option. But I also think that he goes. So we don't really need to continue that discussion. So maybe let's see if any we're set on receiver, but I'm open to it if anyone big falls. So we haven't taken a look at that tab yet.
That receiver.
Yeah, I think Brown is starting to fall there, maybe Waddle, but we have a lot of firepower there where at this point draft capital elsewhere might be better spent.
Yeah, if Rodgers just went.
I think we're really looking at Lawrence here.
Yeah, Lawrence I'm absolutely fine with. I can see a scenario where Conner also falls to us, and I'm absolutely fine with that pick. And entertaining tight end in the 11th round if that's where we want to go. Do we want to go Lawrence here?
Yeah, I think we would be more upset if Lawrence didn't make it back to us than Conner, so let's go with Lawrence.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So Conner's the next pick. If we lose Conner...
There were a couple of other running backs I like there, so let's go back there. I'm always a fan of Tony Pollard, the RB1 on the Cowboys. A.J. Dillon is another guy that could fall into double-digit touchdowns if things break his way. I don't think it will happen, but it's possible. I don't mind Kenyon Drake. The Raiders did pay a lot for him, so you envision them getting him touches, but they're probably not going to be efficient touches on that offense. But as a double-digit round player who is certainly going to get points as a running back. You can't really ask much more than that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We're going to be up here in just a second. My question to you is Pollard over Connor or Connor over Pollard?
I would go Connor there. And then, I would personally go Connor. I think he has the touchdown upside. While he'll at least get us to the playoffs. While Pollard would win you the league if Zeke gets hurt. We've seen Dallas feed Zeke when he's healthy, so Pollard's not going to contribute much when Zeke is healthy, in my opinion. So I would take the upside on the ambiguous backfield in Connor in that case.
Yeah, no, I like that. Pollard he's a guy who I want a lot of, but I never want too much of because, like you said, they feed Zeke when he's there, and my concern is that all that talent gets wasted on another season where Ezekiel Elliott, man, like people misremember exactly what Ezekiel Elliott did last year. He was not by any means a horrible fantasy option. He was not a horrible fantasy back. He probably, if I'm remembering correctly, he probably didn't quite live up to his ADP, but he played almost the whole season. And, when he was healthy, he was still finding ways to get you fantasy points. If I pull him up here real quick, we're not on the clock for a minute, so I'll pull him up here real quick. The Cowboys didn't shy away from him.
After this, I want to touch upon our roster construction because it's looking pretty nice, actually.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, look, if you look here at Ezekiel Elliott real quick, have 27, 24, 17.8, a bunch of these RB1 performances. He was an RB1 over 40% of the time last season, and then he had kind of a down year. But if I'm not mistaken, part of me thinks when he was playing, he was actually playing hurt for a portion of the season.
Yeah, I think he was hurt a lot in that middle part. Sorry, and the thing about Zeke is even if he sucks, Dallas is going to feed him. While with Connor, if Edmonds sucks, I could easily see Arizona making Connor at least the lead back in that backfield. So I like the upside in these tournaments there with Connor. And if we're looking at our roster construction, when you have, like I said, that modified 0 RB build, then you go wide receiver heavy and then 2 quarterbacks before round, within your first 11 picks, we're looking at a 12.8% win rate. So it's looking pretty nice here. You figure at this point, we're probably going to go 3 tight ends. The real decision point, I guess, will be, are we comfortable with staying at 4 running backs, or do you think we're going to need a 5th here? Again, in these tournaments, you kind of play the if-then scenario of we've already drafted 3 running backs, with one of them being in the first 2 rounds. You have to assume mix and smashes. In this tournament high upside scenario, do we want to just stick with 4 running backs here, or do you think we need a 5th there to even get to the playoffs is the question. A lot of these tournaments is just getting your team to the playoffs and then letting variance hit from there.
Right. I think it's going to depend on who we see fall to us over these next 6 or 7 or so picks until we can really decide. I can tell you that if I have a guy like Gus Edwards here, I'm probably feeling a little bit better with the 4 running back build, mainly because I can see an easy scenario where he is relevant some weeks, even when Dobbins is healthy. And obviously the sky could be the limit for Gus Edwards if Dobbins ever misses time, just because they didn't go out and draft anybody this year at the running back position. I think behind him on the roster is Justice Hill, who hasn't hit in his first 2 years and is probably closer to a Dobbins style player than Gus Edwards, except Justice Hill is probably not actually that good. So it would still be Gus Edwards seeing the majority of the early down touches, with maybe Hill sprinkling in receptions if Dobbins were ever to miss time. So I could see Edwards handling the lion's share of the workload in the event that Dobbins went down, and still sneaking in 10 carries per game even when Dobbins is healthy, just because that team just runs the ball so much.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with 4 running backs if we get any of those top 3 guys there. I wouldn't want Latavius here, but if he falls to us a little bit, I do like him as a 4th running back as well. Yeah. Let's take a look at tight ends because we obviously don't have any yet.
Yeah, we're going to be on the clock here in a second.
At this point, I would probably either take Gus or Ingram. Ingram, at least he's going to get volume there. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense at this point. So I don't mind passing on him either here if you do like Gus.
I like Gus, and I think I'm going to take him for basically the exact reason that we just talked about with both him and with Ingram as well. Like you said, there's a lot of targets to go around with the Giants. I'm not even completely sold on Danny Dimes at this point in time. So when you consider the value of those targets, I'm not sure that it's going to be there. Now, if Ingram falls here, I'll happily take him now.
And,
that
at this point, by taking Gus, we can stick to 4 running backs, which opens up another roster spot there. So why don't you go ahead and queue up Ingram, and then we can take a look at the other positions to see if anyone fell.
Yeah. Do we want to do Ingram here? Let me see. It looks like it's a bunch of players.
We don't need another quarterback, and at this point, I wouldn't take another receiver over Ingram when we don't have a tight end. So I would fire on Ingram.
Yep, I think that's an easy one. I mean, Evan Ingram is a guy who last season, he pretty much had everything there with the exception of the touchdowns. Ingram did not find the end zone last year. If we pull him up real quick, and where I'm looking at here, just for those of you who are watching from home who maybe aren't RotoViz subscribers or familiar with it, we have the thing over here called the NFL Player Stat Explorer. So you can literally come in here, you can type in a player's name, look at all these awesome graphs. Here you'll see Ingram last season was 4th in targets, 5th in receptions, 8th in receiving yards, 35th in total touchdowns. He had 1 receiving touchdown and then somehow managed a rushing touchdown. But when you come to this page and you just take a look at these graphs, you'll see that Evan Ingram offered just about everything you could possibly want a tight end, with the exception of touchdowns. And if you want to talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is positive regression, you have to think that Ingram is probably due for some positive regression in 2021, just based on the fact that he found literally 1 touchdown through the air on how many targets was it? Let me see here just real quick. He found 1 touchdown on 109 targets last season. So if positive regression sets in, you're probably looking hopefully between 4 to 5 at touchdowns at least for Ingram, with hopefully some of those targets still hanging around, despite the fact that Saquon Barkley will be back and they just drafted Kadarius Toney. No one actually cares about Kadarius Toney. They drafted a kick returner, I think.
Yeah. I certainly don't get that pick. In terms of Ingram, again, like he's the kind of player where I think that at least among the tight ends that are now available, Ingram offers us spike week options. A lot of these tight ends here, I don't think they're going to offer that many functional fantasy points, but at a certain point, we also just do need fantasy points. So I certainly think we're going to end up going 3 tight ends here. And I think we're at 5 wide receivers as well. So yep. I envision we're going to need 2 tight ends, and the rest of the way we'll also go wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I'm with you here. I think that this is kind of the build that we want as far as roster construction theory goes. Going with the hyper fragile running back approach, I think we're kind of banking a little bit on lottery tickets, but banking on lottery tickets is how you're probably going to win this thing too, because at some point in time, like you said, variance is going to take over if you get to the playoffs, and we just really have no way of actually truly predicting what could come of this season as it begins to unfold. Let's look at tight ends because
like you said, with those running backs, I think a lot of people will at the surface think our running back 2 is pretty gross, and I agree. But I've certainly won best ball leagues with a really gross running back 2. And in terms of this tournament, I think that each of our 3 RB2s offers an injury league winning upside. And, that's what you really want in this tournament. So, yeah, I think that it's not as bad as it seems at the surface for that running back 2.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing too, I think they offer touchdown upside. I can see a scenario where all of these guys are being used as goal line backs or in short yard situations where they're asked to pound the rock, 1, 2, maybe 3 times from the 1 or 2 yard line to get the ball into the end zone. I think James Robinson is possibly the more questionable one at this point, but even Gus Edwards, I think from time to time will still pop up and vulture a touchdown from Dobbins.
Do any tight ends or receivers catch your eye here?
Well, so for tight end, I'm kind of leaning tight end here at this point in time, unless we wanted to go with someone like Denzel Mims, Henry Ruggs, and Perriman. I'm fine with avoiding. It's looking pretty thin here at wide receiver. I'd rather probably shoot my shot on a couple guys late and get tight ends I can make the case for. I think Gerald Everett is super interesting, being tied up with Russell Wilson there. Cole Kmet, he came on towards the back half of last season, and he had a couple decent games. And then on top of that, Adam Troutman with the Saints, I think, is an interesting option as well. And you can't overlook Jared Cook either, who I think is just ready to be possibly Justin Herbert's one of his favorite targets in 2021 as well. Is there a tight end here that you're leaning towards? We're going to be up in 2 picks.
Yeah, I like Everett. I think that, two of my favorite ones that you didn't mention there were Ibron and Hooper.
Everett just went and we're up.
Yeah, I think Ibron and Hooper are interesting. Hooper is potentially the third best pass catcher on that team. Ebron's on the pass happy team. Cook's a little old for me. Troutman, he might just not be good. He's done nothing to really suggest that. Cole Kmet's interesting to me as well, especially when you get Justin Fields there. So I'm kind of good with just getting any 2 of these is really the main point. I think we have to come away with another one of these as well. The question is, do we take another one here at the 4-3, or do we try to risk it and wait for the 15th round?
So, and this is something I thought about earlier in a draft too. So maybe we'll see if you're on board with us. But I'm with you on the guys you just mentioned. I don't hate Jared Cook here. Let's figure this out real quick.
I wouldn't mind Mims here as well. I think that Jets offense is getting relatively underrated just because everyone is thinking about the Gase discount, even though he's no longer there, and they have a quarterback upgrade. So a lot of these Jets, everyone thinks it's going to be a gross offense, and it might be, but I don't think anyone's really acknowledging the potential upturn for that team.
Yeah, so I went ahead and went with Mims because I like the argument that you made there. And then also, I think when we're talking about a third tight end, there's a couple guys here who are legitimate options. Plus, a lot of people have already drafted tight ends. There's actually a couple here who have only one. But there's some – my question is, who has all these tight ends if there's so many that appear to be gone? There's a lot of one-team tight ends. I'm not sure where they all went because it looks like a lot of teams only have one tight end.
Also, even for a third – when you're going with 3 tight ends, I don't mind when you just take the approach where you get a tight end where he might score 0 on most weeks, but when he scores, he's going to score big. And so if we have to scroll a little bit and we don't get any of those top 4 or 5 guys, I like a guy like O.J. Howard there. Where we know he has the ceiling. It's just a matter of will he get the playing time. So that's a kind of guy that I like for a best ball tournament.
Yeah, the one I was curious about was Zack Ertz because I don't see a scenario where he's on the Eagles next year, and even if he is on the Eagles,
then we get the stack.
we get the stack. He's our tight end 3, and there could be a chance that he's still going to be used if the Eagles keep him around. I don't envision Zack Ertz just casually going away, but he did see 72 targets last year. Obviously, he had a down season, but if he's able to come back and be healthy, maybe even join up with Carson Wentz and the Colts, I think Zack Ertz could have a little bit of a revival and possibly be a tight end who we look back on after the 2021 season has ended and think that we maybe faded just a little bit too hard because we incorrectly assumed that he was either going to be a backup to Dallas Goedert or he just simply wasn't going to be on a team or be good or something like that. Like you said, if they score when they're going to hit, and it's going to be good. Chances are if they get a touchdown, they don't need much more than that to be a tight end 1 for the week, even if it's not the tight end 1.
One guy here, I don't personally understand the ADP on Austin Hooper at all. I consider him more in that, Eric Ebron range, roughly tight end. Let's see where I have him ranked. I have Hooper around tight end 18. I think he's anywhere from tight end 14 to 19 or so. He's kind of being more drafted as a tight end 20 kind of range. I think that the Browns they're a run-heavy team and they have 2 good receivers. But after that, Hooper is kind of acting as their wide receiver 3 almost, where he could just fall into the end zone a couple of times. He was a tight end 1 in 5 weeks last year. I think he should be going higher than where he's going.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I don't hate that pick. We'll be up here in a second. Someone actually just someone just take Zack Ertz? Did I never have him in there? I thought maybe I had him in there, but maybe I didn't. I did not have him in there. But we can go Austin Hooper if you want to. There's the wide receivers. I'm still not loving who's hanging around here. Not that I don't think we can't get guys, but I think Hooper is probably a solid pick here.
I would certainly take Hooper over Ertz at this point.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to draft our top-ranked receiver after this for the rest of the way.
Yeah, we're about to unload some DGAF wide receivers here. Let's get Ertz out of here. And
this is what we can also talk about differentiating rosters. In daily fantasy tournaments, we always talk about this. I think that the wrong way to differentiate your roster in best ball is with the early round picks. But at the back half of drafts, I really don't mind taking your shot there because you can get some guys that go undrafted, like a Chase Claypool, that really hit it off. So who are some of your guys in this range?
Well, the one guy, and we're on the clock. We have 20 seconds. Marquez Valdez-Scantling kind of jumps out to me just as a pure deep ball guy who can maybe get you one every couple of weeks and get you some scores here. I don't think they really replaced him in the draft. So we'll go with him. I don't think they really replaced MVS in the draft. I know they drafted Amari Rodgers. I was actually doing a little bit of research on Rodgers earlier today for an article that I'll probably have coming out next week. And there's a lot of underwhelming things when it comes to Rodgers and his profile that I just don't have a lot of confidence in when it comes to looking to him to possibly be a reliable receiver for Aaron Rodgers or whoever the Packers quarterback is going to be in 2021 if it's not Aaron Rodgers. Amari Rodgers certainly doesn't take away from MVS's position. If Rodgers does play, he's probably going to be playing in the slot. MVS will still be that outside wide receiver. You can chuck the ball down the field too, and I like that explosive upside. He certainly had his weeks where he had big plays, and I know he dropped a lot of passes, but when he catches them, he gets it for you. And I don't think that you're really drafting him in a spot where him dropping a pass is probably going to hurt you. It can only help you when he hauls them in.
All right, what do you think? We can start queuing up a couple of players here. Yep. Diami Brown is at the top there. I'm not sold on him. I certainly understand it. I think he's maybe going. The field is on to him. KJ Hamler is a guy I don't mind. Tyrell Williams could get targets, but that offense might be gross. We might be better off just targeting a better offense overall.
Yeah, Dwayne Eskridge is one who I didn't know much about him before the draft. Do you know much about this pick for the Seahawks with Dwayne Eskridge? Is he a guy who's worth calling possibly the David Moore type role for the Seahawks, or what's he doing?
My understanding is that he's certainly a special teams player. He's a kind of player where I really only want to draft him if I've already drafted Russell Wilson or another Seattle Seahawk for a Seahawk stack. I'm not too interested in Eskridge as a one-off, considering he's not a great prospect. It's not really someone I want to chase.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely explosive here. Decent enough workouts, but I thought it was kind of a weird pick. Not someone, especially when you consider all the other wide receivers who get hyped up during the pre-draft process. Eskridge's name was something I didn't hear come up that often, and then the Seahawks, of course, go out and get him.
I don't mind pairing MVS with Lazard, and you hope that the Green Bay wide receiver 2 overall just does something every week, whether it be Lazard or MVS. I think there might be a couple of guys there on that list that could be buried a little bit further that we can look at more. I'm not too interested in any of the guys at the top there.
Now, here's a guy who I've considered as well, Byron Pringle. If you want to talk about targeting good players maybe not a good player, but a player in a good offense, I think Byron Pringle is one of those guys you could possibly consider with the Chiefs. As well. Rashard Higgins has had a couple of decent seasons where he's popped in a few efficiency metrics over at RotoViz with the Browns.
I'm a big fan of Higgins there. I think that you stack him with Hooper. You're kind of just investing in the offense. You're hoping that you don't hope, but if, say, Odell or Jarvis get hurt, you kind of capture more of that passing game. Up and there he goes.
Someone's watching.
I don't mind, I don't really know anything about him, but Nico Collins could get a lot of playing time first year out. Everyone's writing off the Texans as they should, but it doesn't mean that their passing attack might not produce fantasy value in the 18th round of drafts. So I don't mind him there. Travis Fulgham, I would only do it because it would be a stack with Hurts. I like that Washington pick there. We've seen Ben love him at times, even though they have 3 amazing pass catchers on that team. Ben always seems to gravitate towards Washington, so I don't mind it there. We're
up here, dude. I think Travis Fulgham is interesting, just for the reason you said. We would get the stack, and we did see some moments where he popped.
He'll be in there in the 18th round, so I wouldn't pick him here.
We got Hamler.
Someone with an earlier ADP.
You got Hamler or James Washington.
I'll let you make the call there.
I'm gonna go with Hamler.
I have a lot of Hamler, so I like it.
Yeah, he's your prototypical deep ball threat. He's someone who, had a couple decent weeks here and there. And then, do we want to round it out with Fulgham just to call it a night if he's there?
Yeah, so I have 14% Hamler. I just looked it up, which that might be a little bit more than I was hoping for. But Fulgham, I don't love him. I think it would be more of a differentiator in terms of our drafts. So it certainly makes sense. We could just go for it because it's someone that won't be drafted much at all.
And what if he happens to somehow find that hot streak again, like he did in 2020? That could possibly lead to an interesting result. You know what? I'm down with it. I say let's go with Fulgham. You never know what's going to happen. Hopefully he's at least on the roster come September. I think he will be. But we'll take a look at this team here in a second when it's all said and done. We'll see how we're shaping up. My early looks, I would say that I do like the team we have here. I definitely feel good about our youth infusion at quarterback. Running back, we certainly went fragile here, but we do have the high upside Joe Mixon, who will hopefully return to RB1 status. And we can look at these other 3 running backs who I think you can make the easy case for. Any of them could sneak into a bell cow role if something breaks right for them. Hopefully for the players' sake, it's not injury, it's performance-based for our sake, but you can see a scenario where perhaps a performance or injury leads to them being the lead back on an offense. And then our wide receivers are just absolutely explosive. Even though we did not get Joe Burrow to pair with Mixon and Higgins, I think that we still have a really good group of wide receivers who are going to get us a lot of points. What do you think overall? We'll take a look at this draft here in full in a second, but where are you at on this team right now as we close things out here, Mike?
Yeah, I really like the construction that we went with the 2-4, what is that, 8-3, whatever it was.
Let me pull up there. 2-4-9-3, yep.
2-4-9-3. I like that construction overall. I liked a lot of our early round picks. There were a couple of guys that I was hoping that would fall to us in the second half of the draft that didn't. But ultimately, I think that the roster construction is way more important than the player takes. And, we just have to hope that variance hits in that RB2 slot for us most of the way. I think we have a lot of touchdown upside, which really matters. And at tight end, I think that, hopefully we can just compile a couple of weeks. And if someone like a Travis Kelce doesn't put in a historic season again, I think that we have all we have to do is compete at that position. We don't need to win it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think too, it's worth mentioning. None of our tight ends who we have, it's not like they haven't done it before. We have tight ends who have all been in that TE1 territory, even if not the overall TE1. Let me see here. Let's pull.
And at those tight ends, I think all 3 of them do have real touchdown upside. I think a couple of other tight ends there, like we were talking about before briefly, almost like Adam Troutman or someone like that. I think that a lot of them are being drafted for the playing time. Quite frankly, I don't really care about playing time at that point. I want someone who's going to be a red zone weapon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, Eric Ibron, he definitely came on for a big way for the Steelers last season. I think he was kind of a bit of an underrated addition when it happened. And Vance McDonald was still on the team, I believe, last season. So I think people maybe question whether or not Ibron would see enough of the workload to be able to be relevant for fantasy purposes, because we've seen in the past when he wasn't relevant. He's a first-round tight end who didn't really work out well in Detroit. But I mean, if you look at it here, like, the production speaks for itself. Yes, you have a couple bad weeks here, but you have stretched over the course of the season over 50% tight end 1 weeks. Like, that's not anything to joke around with. He saw a decent amount of targets. He saw 91 targets, which is absolutely fine. He managed to find the end zone 5 times. Like, this is kind of what it takes to get to the point where you can say that you are a usable tight end in fantasy weeks. And then again, the beauty of best ball is you do not have to worry at all about making the start-sit decision on whether or not he's going to be the guy you want to roll with that week. You just draft him, you let the process play out, and you see what happens. But there's plenty of tight end 1 weeks that Ibron provided last season. And then if we wanted to look over at Austin Hooper real quick, who has a little bit fewer tight end 1 weeks, but still managed to get there, especially, I mean, Will, if you had him in the fantasy playoffs, like, you were pretty good there. He missed a couple games. That didn't help his case either. So I think Hooper, even if you really think about it, I mean, he missed some games. He only played in 13 last season. So he missed 3 games and he still saw 70 targets. We could possibly be underselling what his targets could look like in 2020 if we're not putting a little context to just the numbers we saw from him last season without realizing the amount of games that he played.
Yeah, I think that ultimately if we're going 3 tight ends in rounds 11 plus or whatever it was, I'm really happy with the 3 we got. I'm very happy with the 2 quarterbacks we got, and I think it was rounds like 8 and 10 or so. Yep. And I think ultimately, it was somewhat painful to take Mixon over Adams. However, with the way the draft played out, I am happy that we went Mixon at that point, because as we saw in rounds roughly 3 through 7 or so, there wasn't really any running backs we wanted there, and we loved all of the receivers there. So that is kind of one of the points to go modified 0 RB, is so that way you can hammer those receivers and not, hesitate. You don't have to hesitate and, consider a running back at that point.
Absolutely. And another thing that I think kind of even points to justifying these builds, especially when you consider, like you said, getting a guy like Mixon going modified 0 RB. One of my favorite tools over at RotoViz, I'm not going to pull it up here. We want to get ourselves out of here in a little bit, but is the Win the Flex tool, which really does a good job of showing the value that wide receivers hold over the course of a season relative to running backs. It often gets perceived that you need, a swath of really amazing running backs to kind of get you to that point in season where you're winning games, you're winning leagues, you're making the playoffs. And really, when you look at the PPR format in the RotoViz Win the Flex tool, you see that wide receivers hold a lot more value stretched out over the course of the season than the running backs do. There's a significant drop-off in production from a fantasy points perspective with the running back position compared to wide receivers, where you just have so many who could hit for you any given week and really provide your roster with that upside that we're looking for. Do you have anything else to add, Michael?
I think we covered a lot in this one draft. I'm happy with the way it went, and hopefully we'll do a lot more over the course of the offseason.
Definitely. I'll be looking to get into a few more of these. For those of you who are tuning in, for those of you who maybe are watching later, we did this draft over at Underdog Fantasy. It is in the Best Ball Mania 2 streets. It is a $25 entry fee for a chance at a grand prize at $1,001,001. If you are not on Underdog Fantasy and want to join, you can feel free to head on over to the link I provided in the YouTube page along with my Twitter page. You can use promo code Kruegs and you can begin drafting today. Also, be sure to check out all of Michael's articles over at RotoViz. If you want to look up particularly on functional fantasy points, he's got a few articles over there, including the introductory one, which is also in the YouTube description. So definitely check everything out. If you have any questions, hit us up on Twitter. You can find me at ZK_FFB and Michael at Dubner_Michael. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm already cashing my $500,000 split there, taking it to the bank right now.
Yeah, I'll see you on our yacht. All right. Take it easy, buddy. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next week.